45 years, you've lasted through more disasters than a lot of FEMA administrators.
That's probably correct.
Which is really quite something. Are you able to put that in perspective yet?
No, and I really, through the years, I've really never went to the point of looking at it from the standpoint of numbers or quantities and so forth. It was just each time we had an event, if it was large enough and it was serious enough and was catastrophic enough to get a declaration, we went for a declaration. And we've been very fortunate, and in most cases, we would make decisions based on the information. And we've had very few, in fact, to be honest with you, I don't know, but 2 turndowns, and those actually, one of those were reversed after we got additional information. So we've only had, that I can recall, only one that we got turned down totally on that I felt like we should have gotten.
In emergency management, we deal with preparedness, and we see an event coming, and it's a response thought. All those years that you were in recovery, when you saw a big event coming, what was your thought process before something happened?
More work. No, it's one of those things where you kind of monitor. I mean, I know that in recovery you really don't do a lot during the event because of the fact it's basically responding and people going out and doing what they need to do to get people out of harm's way and basically try to protect property and so forth. So recovery is one of those things where you kind of monitor what's going on. You start the ball rolling, and sometimes during the response, you're actually doing some recovery, collecting information. You're really not doing recovery, but you're doing some collecting of the information.
But what goes through your mind in 2005 when you see Katrina in the Gulf and you know it's coming to Mississippi? What are you thinking about before that storm before she even hits?
Years ago, when we would have various storms coming in, hurricane-wise, I would ignore it as long as I felt I could. In other words, because we've got the Gulf of Mexico, and I feel like that sometimes the Gulf of Mexico is not necessarily the bullseye, and so we have storms that comes through the Caribbean, and they go towards Florida, and they go towards other locations. That was kind of with Katrina. I mean, as it was coming in, approaching in. As long as it was where it was out in the Caribbean, I was fine with it. And all at once it got into the Gulf of Mexico, and the situation started changing. And being mindful of the fact that we've had a large number of other storms that have come in, and they kept saying it was a 5. We knew Camille was a 5, so we knew what was happening. But as it got closer, it started going down in strength and so forth. And we've had that same pattern, and so it was one of those things where everybody was kind of hoping and praying, I guess, that it would go down to a 1, 2, or something 3 at the most. And when it didn't, I mean, it did after eventually, but it was closer to shore than what we felt like it. And that was just one of those things. And we sit back, and I can remember the night that the governor and the emergency management director, Mr. Latham, went down that day and was talking to all the elected officials. They came back that night. He had a news conference. He came to the EOC. As he passed by, he made a comment. He said, we've done everything we can do. He said, I just hope the people understand, and they've heeded our warning to evacuate. And he just looked at me. He said, I hope we did our job. And I said, Governor, I think you did what you could. And I said, that's all you can do is tell the people. So I think it was just one of those things. And then the next morning is when we, and there for a period of time, we didn't know what the damage was. And until the next morning, we started getting a lot of reports in. That's when we realized it was as large as it was. And as the days wore on, we realized it was a lot larger than we expected even that morning. So,
as the recovery chief, when you laid eyes on it for the first time and you got down there, did you want to resign then?
No. And that's one of the things, I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying, but, to see tornado damage in one location is almost the same as another location. If someone laid out a bunch of pictures on the table of tornado damage or hurricane damage or flood damage and not tell you where it was at, you wouldn't know. And I said, you know, that's kind of the way that happened when we went to the coast. I mean, I remember seeing pictures of Camille. I remember seeing going down when George hit. I remember I went down when Frederick hit. So, I mean, but to go down and to see block after block, nothing other than just either rubble or a concrete pad for a house, foundation, or blocks, steps. That was kind of unusual, and to see how far off of the beach that it actually did that type of construction, it was kind of unbelievable.
But a daunting task for you. 11,000 project worksheets, projects
Mm-hmm.
were identified in Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
Did it just seem overwhelming?
It's kind of one of those things where you really don't get a full picture of it until you see it. And I had a number of people, including Steve Glenn, who was working with FEMA, came up to me one day. He was the PI, the public assistance person out of region, and he come up and he said, "Okay, we need to make a plan." And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "We got one." He said, "What is it?" I said, "We're going to tend to do what we've been doing in the past on these disasters." And he looked at me and said, "How many PWs do you think you're going to have?" I said, 700, maybe 600, 700. He said, how much you think it's going to, mount up to?" Probably about $1 billion. I said, maybe a little less than that. And he said, "Okay." He said, "Let me give you the picture." He said, "I've seen a number of disasters." And he said, "I just want you to know, you're looking at probably at least 10,000 PWs. And he said, you're looking at close to probably $2.5 billion. He said, "Now what are you going to do?" I said, "I'll have to do a little regrouping and a little thought," because I said, "I don't know." Because I said, we've handled these things in the past with the staff we've had. And I said, at the time we had 10 people. And I said, we looked at it, and he said, 10's not going to handle it. He said, "There's no way." So we had to regroup. We got in touch with some contractors and put out some bids or requests for bids to get some people in here that knew what they need to do as far as the public assistance program to help us out. We had to have people that could do what we needed to have done. And so at that point in time, we had a contract with the PBS&J that came in. They had people who had already had the experience with public assistance, so they helped us to get started. Then as we continued on, we realized that we was looking at billions of dollars, and we said, okay, and Governor Barber decided that, there needed to be some type of an oversight to where that we could make sure that if we got the money, that we kept the money, and that we didn't lose the money through either de-obligations or things that were not eligible. And so we was able to get the Horn Group, and they came in and was the oversight for the financial side of it. So between the engineering and technical side with Atkins and with the Horn group that came in and with the staff that we was able to hire, that's how we got done. But when we look at it from the standpoint, we had about 100, at one point we had over 100 people with Horn. We had close to 120 some people with Atkins, and we hired probably at one time we had over 50 people with the state as far as the public assistance program. So at one point in time, not all those were at the same time, but at one point we probably had close to 200 and some people that was working the public assistance program.
You're very humble, but as you drive the coast now, to know that every project came across your desk in recovery down there, is there any sense of pride for you?
Well, it is, I guess the one that I pass most often is the Visitors Museum or Visitors Center down there on Highway 90, there next to the lighthouse. And that's kind of one of those things where I knew what the old Visitor Center looked like behind the service station there. The service station was on the corner. And when you look at some of those facilities now, based on the fact that they have been, basically instructed from the ground up, it does give you a little pride to know that you had something. And that's one of the things I have encouraged all the staff that we've ever had is if you can look back on some of the things that you've accomplished based on buildings and structures and how communities have recovered and are now, thriving. Sure, it took a long time for the coast to recover from the hurricane, but I think it's one of those things where it's kind of one of those things where they built back and built back better. Most of those buildings that were damaged or destroyed during Katrina in the last few storms we've had, which has not been as large as Katrina, they haven't had the damage that they would have had they not built back better.
I think a lot of people may not realize that you've played a hand in the two deadliest hurricanes that have hit this state, certainly Katrina, but you were also working recovery projects for, you were involved with MEMA, Civil Defense, after Camille.
Yes.
What do you remember of that?
Well, we was closing out some projects and some applicants, and all the work had been completed, and it was just going through getting the paperwork. And as I've told a lot of the staff, is to get a disaster or to have a disaster and to get a declaration is one accomplishment, but the other accomplishment is to make sure that the funds are given to the people and they're used in the right way, and at the same time get to a point where all the work is complete, and then you can close out that disaster.
Right around 60 declarations of some sort, federal declarations here in the state. Outside of Katrina, what are some memories that stick out in your mind from some of those past disasters? Smithville, perhaps?
Smithville was one that I think that kind of is a memory from the standpoint it was a small town who basically got totally wiped out, and you see those things, and now you go through the town of Smithville, and there are some areas that you probably can still see where the tornado went through, but a good percentage of it is where the people and the town has built back. I guess the next largest disaster the state had was the 1994 ice storm up in North Mississippi, or the northern part of the state, and that was one that was around $100 million, and we pretty well got most of that was electrical power associations or the co-ops that we have in the state. That's where a large percentage of it. The rest of it was based on debris removal, getting trees, and the debris out of the cities. But I guess it was back in 1972. No, it was 1974. I guess it was when we had the floods up in the Delta. There was a large number of counties that was included in that. That's another one of the larger ones.
About that 79 Easter flood.
The 79 Easter flood in the city of Jackson. Yes, that was one that that was during the time that I guess a lot of people was concerned was the city of Jackson in some of the areas, especially the northern part up there along the Pearl River, next towards the reservoir. Was that ever going to come back because of the fact that most of those homes have water up to the eaves of their roofs and so forth, and people looked at it and said, people are not going to buy these homes. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, the area still, it's still surviving. There's people living in those homes.
You've been doing this job as long as I've been alive, because I was born in '72. I know it's hard to look back, but what are you going to miss the most?
The people, working, I guess, with the people, with the agency, with the federal government, from the standpoint of FEMA.
I forget, how many kids do you have?
I've got two. Got a boy and a girl.
And how many grandkids?
I got 4.
So do you now look forward to being able to spend more time, reconnect with them after having to work so much?
Yes. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember exactly what we was doing or why we was together, but we're a close family. But we was talking, and every year we try to get together. We don't. Most times we can't get both of the families together, but we do go to the point of trying to get together as often as we can. But daughter and son-in-law and the grandkids quite often go to the mountains. My son goes with us quite often when he has the opportunity and so forth, but sometimes we don't all get to go together. So anyway, we was talking, and they made a comment to me about that. We still need to plan on going on the spring break and going during the summer. That we want to go up and spend time in the mountains. And I said, next year we can do 2 weeks.
Without having to worry about rushing back.
That's right. Yes.
And that's just the special things that you're going to be able to do now, right?
Yes.
You know, I like to learn from my elders. And you did this, you had a job for 45 years. And you had to miss a lot of family stuff. What is your advice to people that are still working? If you could look back now and tell the younger Larry Bowman what he should do when it comes to balancing family and public service.
I probably didn't do everything right. There's probably areas that I would have done different now that I can look back on it. There was probably weekends that I probably would have not traveled to the coast. On Sundays, I would have waited till Monday. But as I tell people, as you get older, you feel more at the fact that you need to have a little more time to relax and to rest. So that was kind of one of those things. So I think it's one of those things where you just got to look at it and say, is it worth it to go to the point of spending most of your time working, or is it something you need to spend some time with your family? And I think that's, if I have any kind of regrets, is that there probably is times that I could have made a decision to either be with them longer on Sundays or so forth. But when we have an event where you're working in a disaster in a field office, years ago we didn't have the luxury of having weekends off. FEMA came in, you was working weekends. There's times I've talked to my children about it, and they said we didn't lack anything. We realized that you had to do what you had to do because it was a job, and so there's no regrets on their part. It's just the fact that probably I could have spent a lot more time with them. Many birthdays, many anniversaries was spent in the JFOs over the years. Yes.
Can we rule out seeing Larry Bowman in a FEMA shirt or as a consultant, or is Larry done?
I don't know that Larry's done, but I'm not sure that I can commit to either one of those, because right now I have not made a decision about doing anything. I think it's one of those things where that there's opportunities. I've talked with various people, and there's things that if I wanted to tomorrow, I could go to work for someone, but I'm not making any commitment to anyone, and I'm not ruling out anything. Would I put a FEMA shirt on? I've had one on before, but I'm not going to say no.
Last question for you. You now have a chance to, I don't want to say reconnect, but you'll be able to spend a lot more time with your wife, Nancy.
Yeah. The joke at the house has been is if I retire, she's been retired for, I think, 2003, and so she's been retired for quite some time now. She has her things that she does, different things, but she told me, years ago, if you retired, that she would have to go back to work. I don't think that'll happen, but I think we both may find things to do that will, I guess, augment some of the time. But right now I'm not sure. I'm going to go home, spend some time, and possibly do some travel. It's not going to be extensive, but do some travel, visit with some of the relatives in West Virginia, and spend some time with some other friends in other locations. But it'll be different, and she knows it, and I do too. But it'll be fine.